At the lab test, I will say, I'd like you to demonstrate how you would evaluate lumbar spine range of motion in a seated position, and that's kind of a giveaway. It means the patient is seated, and so are you. And flexion and extension, rotation, and lateral bending. So, when the patient is seated, you're going to be in a particular position. You're going to put. There's a couple different ways to do it. I like to use my two fingers and my thumb behind my fingers like that. That gives me, and then this kind of like a solid kind of thing right here. And then my forearm should be perpendicular to the spine. And even though this is specific to the lumbar spine, I'm going to demonstrate it from the thoracic, because typically when you do this, you start at the top and work down the bottom. So my hand is positioned like this, perpendicular to the spine. Then I'm pushing in, and then the patient is relaxing. So pushing in, this creates extension, relaxation creates flexion, right? So you're going to be able to appreciate flexion and extension. When I do rotation, I put my hand typically like this, so that my thumb is on the ipsilateral side of the gutter between the spinous processes and the transverse processes, and the patient is rotating, or I'm rotating the patient, and then I'm feeling for the spinous processes moving away from me. And you could also potentially use your fingers in that kind of movement, and your fingers are going to feel the spinous processes moving away. And then with lateral bending, again, you can use your thumb or your fingers, and the patient is laterally bending to that side. Then you're feeling kind of a compression on the side, because you're doing this typically ipsilateral. So if I have a model up here, you have a seat. So the patient is seated, facing one direction, and they should orient themselves so they're pretty much close to the edge of the table, as opposed to being, seated way over here or something. That way you don't have to kind of orient yourself that way. So I am right-handed, so my right hand is my dominant hand in terms of using the push pressure. So for this, the patient is going to interlace their fingers, put them behind their neck, and bring their elbows together. Most people can get their elbows together. Sometimes, depending upon flexibility, they're out a little bit like this. So your contact would either be to hold one elbow and then use your forearm so that the level of the patient's elbows is equal, or if they're able to get their elbows together, I just grab them with my hand like this. So I'm sitting facing the opposite direction so that I can be perpendicular. You can see half my butt cheek is on the table and half my butt cheek is off the table. So if I'm like this, then I can't get much oomph. If I'm like this, then I can be perpendicular. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use her elbows and her upper extremities as a lever. And I'm going to lift her into extension, and then I'm going to drop her. So the patient has to be relaxed enough to accommodate this. This hand here is pushing. This takes a little bit of effort, because you got to oomph to make that impression. You're going to start from the lever. The lever is the upper extremities, and then you move away from the lever. So you're going to move down. The lower you go, the more pressure you have to apply. It's kind of like if you've got however many 10 cars at a stoplight, and the light goes green, which is the first one to move.
The guy in front.
Car number 1, car number 2, car number 3, all the way down. So, at the top part, it's not that much that's going to be able to engage it. But then a little bit lower, a little bit more, lower, a little bit more, lower, even a little bit more, lower, even a little bit more, lower, even a little bit more, a little bit more pressure. I want to be able to keep the patient's back straight. This is not where I'm doing this. It's because you can see her back is straight, and I'm simply moving it into flexion and extension, feeling for the mobility of the spinous segments and or the individual vertebra. This isn't necessarily super specific necessarily, but you're just appreciating kind of combination of a regional segmental sense of, yes, it's moving, no, it's not moving, and this gives you information about fixation. This would be coupled to when a patient is prone. We've already gone over that, right, in terms of prone appreciation. Flexion and extension would be like this. Rotation is like this or like this, right? You all remember that? Mm-hmm. Okay, so this is done in a seated position. Now, to accommodate rotation, I'm going to have the patient put their arms on their opposite shoulder balls, and then I can grab their opposite shoulder. If the person is large and you can't necessarily reach around all the way, you can grab their distal humerus on that side, because that's still going to allow you to make a rotation that way. So when I make this contact, my body is kind of in contact with the patient. So I'm moving my body, which moves the patient's body. So again, my hand position is such that my thumb is on the ipsilateral part of the spinous process, kind of in that spinous process gutter between it and the transverse. You could potentially use your fingers. I like to use my thumb. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate the patient. Again, the lower I go, the more I have to rotate. In this particular move, I have to rotate her. She's passive in this. And this hand isn't really pushing, it's just feeling. Okay? And the lower I go, the more I have to rotate to get that sense of, yes, it's moving. What I'm feeling for when I'm doing this, the spinous process is moving away from me, right? So as I said, you could use your fingers here and potentially get the same kind of information. Whatever kind of works better for you and your degree of sensitivity. But again, it's also important to try to keep the patient's back as straight as possible. You're not kind of rotating her, you know, kind of like all funky kind of ways. Just keep her straight and just rotate all the way down, getting that sense up, okay? So that's for rotation. For lateral bending, which I frankly don't use a lot, one of the ways that you can accomplish this clinically, a patient, you know, if they have a gown on, or, you know, if it's a male, maybe no shirt on, and you can see all the spinous processes, you can just have them laterally bend when they're seated like that, and you'll be able to see how, you know, the curve kind of goes, and that can give you information as well. But if you want to do it more actively, I'm going to put my axilla on top of her shoulder, again, thumb, and then I'm going to just bend her into lateral bending. Again, just kind of feeling for the movement at that segment. So when I'm up here doing it, that's what's laterally bending. When I'm down here, she's already laterally bent, so this is kind of like locked into laterally bend, right? But then I'm getting movement at the lower segments. So again, this is like car number 1, when the light turns green, goes, but you know, car 10 or 12 has to wait until its turn comes, and so you're getting that more accentuated kind of movement. All right. Now, flexion and extension I do with my dominant hand, so it's all this way. Obviously, rotation, I'm going to have to do this side, and then to do the other side, I got to come over like this. You can have your shoulder balls again. And or this for lateral bending. Okay. So right lateral bend, left lateral bend, right rotation, left rotation. You got to switch sides. Flexion and extension, you can stay so that you're able to use the pressure with your dominant hand. Okay, any questions on that? Yeah, this is an assessment technique, and one that you would potentially use in assessing your patient's range of motion and or joint play. And again, just to remind you, let's lay face down. So in the context of doing that in a prone position, slack to the head, I usually use a bilateral thenar kind of contact. Both hands, it's flexion and extension, one hand or the other. I don't usually raise my hand or lift it off, but just so you understand, this is left rotation, this is right rotation, right? I typically kind of go flexion and extension, and then, without really taking my hand off, so I can kind of make it more efficient. But just so you understand. So if you're asked to demonstrate how you assess lumbar range of motion for flexion and extension in a prone position, it's this. Flexion, extension, or rotation, whichever one you're asked. If you're asked to demonstrate how you would assess it in a seated position, you just saw that. How would you assess it in a sideline position? This is what it would look like. Turn on your side, with this side down, face me. A lot of times students are like, I don't know what you're saying. And when I say, could you demonstrate how you would assess lumbar spine, flexion and extension in a sideline position? Everybody, not everybody, some people just look at me like they've never heard of it before. This is what we've described all along with putting the leg between your legs close to this edge. But now what I'm doing, her femur is the lever, right? And this is doing the same thing that her arms did up above, right? I'm using my middle finger on the SPs. The higher her legs go into flexion, the higher upper spinous processes I'm able to go upper lumbar spine, right? So this is how you assess lumbar spine range of motion for flexion and extension in a sideline position. So don't be surprised when you're asked that. You will be, from your partner or whatever. Like I said, I got quite a few blank stares, like, I don't know what you're talking about. I probably still would get some like there. In any case, that's it. All right. Is there any questions about those assessment techniques?
So
We're
you're
gonna.
just keeping your fingers on the spinous process.
Yeah.